Welcome to the Nerd Journey Podcast. Our goal is to help you, the technology professional, accelerate your career progression, increase your job satisfaction, and be more effective in your existing role.
We want to bring listeners like you the career advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers.
I'm John White, at VJourneyman on Twitter, sharing co-host duties with Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_.
We're two former IT operations guys who have moved on to pre-sales roles with technology vendors. We have our opinions, but we also like to highlight the journeys of others and see what we can learn from them.
We'd also like to ask for your feedback to make this a conversation, not a one-way broadcast. Email us at nerdjourneypodcast@gmail.com or DM us at nerdjourney on Twitter. So come join us on our nerd journey.
Let's take a trip. Welcome to episode 271. We're excited to share with you part 2 of a discussion with Justin Kelly. He's the co-founder and CEO of Secure Bearing LLC, an IT services provider specializing in networking, security, and automation and orchestration. If you missed part 1 of our discussion with Justin in episode 270, it's well worth the listen. In that episode, we talked about the determination and perseverance Justin needed to learn a number of different skills while he was trying to break into that first IT job. He had to learn about networking and passed some very advanced Cisco certifications. He also had to learn about Windows and Active Directory administration, and he also recounted the story of joining a very helpful community. Justin also gave us some perspective in that episode about how hiring managers and business owners think about certifications when it comes to making hiring decisions at companies like IT service providers. That's a good section to listen to if you're considering working for an IT service provider that might need certifications for their staff. Near the end of episode 270, we heard Justin recounting the decision to leave a great culture at the school he worked for to pursue a job at a managed services provider. This week in part 2, he'll give you a little more context about why it really was the Hurt Locker. You'll get to hear the story of an unexpected opportunity that got Justin out of the Hurt Locker and helped him learn a lot of things about system design. And then, what would make someone go back to an employer that they refer to as the Hurt Locker? That might be a little bit of a head scratcher, but you should definitely keep listening if you want to know the answer. It might not be what you think. We'll also hear the story about the genesis of Secure Bearing LLC, Justin's company that he owns and is the CEO of today. He'll speak to the way his perspective changed after working inside technology operations and then becoming a business owner. And then I just want to clarify, you're going to hear some mention of terms that might seem a little foreign to you if you're not a networking expert. iOS and NXOS, those are software packages that help manage Cisco networking devices. Nothing to do with Apple technologies, just so you know, going into it. So let's catch the rest of the story. Here we go with part 2 of our discussion with Justin Kelly.
To your question, I had absolutely no idea that I was burning the candle at both ends in the middle. And it took gentle nudging and maybe not so gentle nudging to help me realize that.
I love the fact that someone helped you recognize that despite an enjoyment of learning, this was having a negative impact on your personal life or lack of personal life outside work. Because it seems to be a pattern for those people who are in the challenging situations where they can't always see it because they're in it. And they need someone outside themselves, whether it's a girlfriend, a spouse, a good friend, another family member, to point it out. Thankful we have people like that who will, quote, be that friend, like Eric Gross told us in one of the last few episodes.
When I say the Hurt Locker, I'm not overemphasizing. I worked shifts that were 24 hours. I sat in a chair for 24 hours. I was working 10 or 12-hour days and coming home and getting on P1 bridges at 2 o'clock in the morning. It was a very taxing role. But I look back on it very fondly.
You said something earlier about growth. Is it the growth that you're looking back fondly on, or is it the stress and pace?
It's not the stress and pace. It was definitely the growth. And, you asked a question about taking some culture with me. The camaraderie at this organization was something that I wanted to recreate ever since I left, because it was just such a tight-knit group of individuals who were in the Hurt Locker together. The knock that we worked in wasn't cubicled. We all sat in rows, and we all could hear each other and look at each other. Yeah, there was a lot of camaraderie that came out of it. Something I didn't mention was it was a military-like culture, and the regional manager was prior military, and almost everyone that was working there was also, not everyone, but most were ex-military. So I have not served, and grateful to those who do and who have. I was a bit of an outsider, specifically to the regional management because of that fact. But what a tight-knit group of people.
Having had the experience and the close camaraderie and worked on all these other environments, I think John asked it earlier, but we didn't really get to it. Was there a type of company or a company in a specific market that you wanted to work for more than others after having the experience at the MSP?
Yeah. I actually went to work for one of them 2 jobs after that. And I want to say that the same draw with the culture and the individuals who worked there that I was interacting with and upper management, and how they conducted themselves and treated their managed service provider. Companies don't always treat their managed service provider or their MSP workers the best. I definitely found a couple of those while I was there that I was like, oh, well, I wish I worked for this organization.
Were those like software companies, finance companies, retail, manufacturing? Was there any specific segment that stood out?
Well, I went to work for the software company. I would say that healthcare and retail, the folks that I was exposed to, are operating with a higher level of stress. So that precluded wanting to work in those specific verticals for me, having been exposed to them. And then, one of the coolest parts of working for a Cisco managed service provider was we actually managed Cisco's networks, all of their data centers, their campuses, their circuits. It was just a massive inventory. And just about everyone that we interacted with within Cisco was very knowledgeable, very professional. And it's always nice talking to someone who, whether they're genuine or not, they're putting off the vibe that they're enjoying what they're doing or where they're working.
So what did the transition away from that position look like? It sounds like you were helped to understand that the stress and hours were not helping you. Did you recognize at that point, oh, it's the growth opportunities that I really enjoy? Is there an organization where I can continue to grow, maybe without all the stress?
I actually got connected through a staffing agency who reached out to me. So I wasn't actively looking at the time, and I didn't say no. It was compelling, and they reached out with a very specific opportunity. It wasn't like, hey, we have 50 roles that maybe you might be interested in. It was, we have a gem of a role with a company that has almost no turnover, and your skills seem to align with it. Would you be interested in learning more? So it kind of snowballed from there, and it was a very different transition compared to my previous transition, where the school I worked for and the coworkers that I worked with were supportive and kind and happy. The manager I had at this job when I left was not any of those things. For me, that just helped me close the door with almost zero regret, and my colleagues and friends who I still have relationships with to this day, I've maintained. So I netted all the benefits that I feel like I could when I was there, and I didn't burn any bridges when I left.
It sounds like that one manager took it personally, though.
Yeah, I met him again at a place I worked. He moved to a place, and I worked there for a very brief time. So he didn't strike me as the happiest person just in general, but I knew at the time, and I know now that has absolutely nothing to do with me.
Gotcha. So, was it a gem of a role that you moved to?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah, boy, it was fantastic. If you don't mind, before we move on, I want to just quickly give credit to someone where credit is very much due. And it helped me make a bigger upward move much later on. The regional manager, because I wasn't military, I don't think I was a favorable selection for what we called a technical lead or a technical executive within the managed service provider world. So a TL or a technical lead is somebody who is like an account supporter, and a TE, a technical executive, is like the throat to choke, the head to chop when things go bad. And I had none of those roles. And I got moved to second shift, and my manager at the time was a New Yorker, and I worked on a customer with him, and everything went really well. And he just started handing me TL and TE roles. And the main TE role that took up most of my time was with the software company that I eventually went to work for. So, it was someone who took a chance on me, who was not playing any of the politics within my regional office, and it just paid dividends. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that.
That's so cool.
Yeah. Amazing to have a supporter inside any organization. And it goes to show you, like, everybody can be working in the same stressful environment, and it presents itself in different ways, right? It's not only a negative expression, it can be a positive one as well. It is harder when you're under a bunch of stress to be extremely positive.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So to your last question about, was it a gem? When I moved to the next role at the agri-lender, which was a very large bank monetarily, and served several, I forget how many, association banks. But that was a major transition for me in my career, in working for a managed service provider where you are going into and supporting existing infrastructure, existing companies. And I moved into a role where I had to design and work with vendors and partners to procure and implement. And the culture there was just fantastic. And the hiring manager did not lie. There was almost no turnover. Most of the people that worked there had been there 15 or 20 years. And one of the network administrators actually retired a couple of years after I started. He had been there for 30-something years. But talk about night and day. I went from the Hurt Locker to not a government agency, but as close to one. It was a federal bank.
What were the elements of design that you had to fill gaps for that maybe you hadn't learned before? Because I think there are a lot of people out there who might be considering this move up to more architecture and design from, I'm just the break fix person. So I'd be curious to get your take on that.
It was a major adjustment. And one of the initiatives that we had was to move away from some aging but excellent 6509s and 6513s that lived in the MDFs of the multi-floor building and the data center in the center of our secured floor. So we worked with a vendor to get the pre-sales design, but we actually had to take that into post-sales ourselves and work out the differences between the iOS and the not as mature NXOS variant that we moved to. That was all novel to me and very much a learning experience, and mistakes were made. One of the other things that we did was roll out a DMVPN in place of some ASAs that were just doing some traditional policy-based VPNs, site-to-site tunnels to and from locations that the bank had to communicate with. There were definitely some mistakes made with that. It was a really great learning experience and a laid-back environment, but also my first exposure to a measure 10 times and sharpen the axe and then swing it.
A lot more planning to do to avoid the mistakes in the implementation.
I'm fascinated to hear about that transition from point-to-point VPN, if I'm understanding correctly, to multi-point VPN. Was that the idea? Did that have to do with kind of the organizational structure of the member institutions that were part of that credit lending operation, or was it driven by something else?
So I'll just preface this is my opinion and my professional experience, but policy-based VPNs are very unreliable and they go down a lot. Also, there's just a limitation on how you route through it, right? It's based on the source and destination proxy IDs or crypto ACL, depending on the vendor we're talking about. So in other words, your source is set, your destination is set. Whereas DMVPN, and we did a DMVPN phase 3, establishes tunnels from spoke to spoke. So it's essentially a full mesh network, and on-demand tunnels are built as opposed to having to backhaul all of your traffic through a central point.
Got it. So it was really more of a technology thing than it was a structural, like organizational structure thing.
Yeah, and one of the drivers was bandwidth consumption at the head end, right? So moving to the DMVPN for spoke-to-spoke communication took traffic out of our data center, which resulted in less overhead on the circuits and no longer a need to increase spend for additional bandwidth.
It takes out that hub in the hub and spoke model and goes straight to a mesh. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, the spokes are able to cut the hub out, I think, after like one or two packets, then they just communicate directly to each other. It's been a little while since I've worked with DMVPN now with SD-WAN.
Full disclosure, I have no exposure to it at all, except at the 100 level. So I've always just been curious about that transition.
Yeah, it was a positive one. Everybody was happy.
So we're talking a lot about bandwidth and overhead, and those are two things that have to be factored in a little bit different way when you own a business, as you do today. So can you tell us the genesis or origin story of what gave you the idea and desire to start your own business, and a little bit about how you transitioned into it?
Sure. I finished my journey for the CCIE. It's a lifelong journey of continual learning. I passed the test in July of 2015. And around that time, my wife and I found out that her dad had fallen ill. So I just took the first job I could. We were in Chicago at the time, to move back to Austin to make sure that our kids, which we have 3 of, by the way, would be close to their grandfather. Shortly after we moved back, the place that I look back on so fondly, the Hurt Locker, one of the colleagues that I had met at the time who was in a totally different division, the Spec Ops division, special operations within the organization, reached out to me and said, "Hey, we got a role. It's nothing like what you did before. You should come work here." And this guy that reached out to me, I have nothing but the utmost respect for, and we keep in contact to this day. I said, okay, I'm always open to having a conversation. I had the call with, honestly, my favorite boss of all time, and he just laid out all of the responsibilities and expectations for the role, which were nothing like what I had done in the past. It was automation development for a very large private wealth management company, largest in the world. And the inaugural project was to automate a specific vendor technology for a very large contract. And then in the peripheral vision being working with everything from databases to systems to networking to everything within an IT shop from the perspective of automation. So I asked for a monetary value that I felt was a little bit ridiculous to justify moving on. And I was a little excited about the role, but they called me up, they offered me the job, and that was it. I had made a transition from networking and security and doing my own thing with network and security automation to being an automation developer. And not long before that, someone had reached out to me about doing some subcontracting in the Bay Area. which I declined at the time, but said I would revisit. And I ended up revisiting it. And in order to do so, formed an LLC, Secure Bearing LLC. There's no special meaning behind the name other than it's a secure direction in nautical terms, a secure bearing. I didn't really give it much thought. My partner and I formed it with $50 each. And the purpose of founding the company was to keep my skills sharp for all of the work that I had done and all of the things that I had learned in my career up to that point.
So you took a new job, relocated, and decided to moonlight as well.
Yep.
I'm guessing not all at once, but
Right.
you said special operations team at the Hurt Locker, and all I could imagine was that you were joining a Navy SEAL-like group. That's pretty interesting. Was that organization focused around like large global clients, or what made it special?
Some of the largest or the largest global clients in the world, period. They had a run rate of $2 billion before they moved into another field and just worked with every household name out there and the largest companies out there that you didn't know until you look them up. So, that was very appealing. But the special operations modicum very much was accurate. Our boss worked directly for the CEO, and he described this very small group of just the smartest people I've met to this day, and are way smarter than I. We would all put our heads together and solve really complex problems. And they called us the tip of the CEO's spear. I haven't really dug below the surface, but it was a really fun and unique role that crossed so many different things, from data science to software development to network foundation, being a prerequisite to doing just about anything, and the operational component being layered on top, right? You cannot write an automation and tests for an automation that are doing operational tasks in high stakes environments without having worked in operations.
I like the idea of getting that exposure and experience in a super large scale environment, because a lot of people have that same issue we talked about earlier, the experience that you can't get until you've done it, needing that experience at scale. This is very much an experience at scale opportunity that you're talking about, which is incredible to have on your resume, to be able to say that you were a part of that. And it sounds like you were part of really a think tank, skunkworks kind of group that would just go out there and figure stuff out for large customers.
Yeah, I think that describes it pretty well. And, I worked with several customers and helped my colleagues with their data refinement, that we called it, where we would take, 500,000, 1 million, 10 million lines of unstructured data, like ticket dumps or monitoring log dumps, and just sort through that and turn that into a presentation and target for these organizations for your mean time to automate, essentially, right? Like, here is the percentage of things that we can target, and here are the projected savings, and here's how long it's going to take. And it was a lot of fun. But one customer stands out specifically, which was the one that they hired me for, the large contract I mentioned previously. And I work in our business now with customers and enterprise automation, and everybody is in different stages of their journey. But one of the key components of an organization's success with adopting network automation is buy-in, not just from the people turning the screws and who did or do the technical work, or even their managers, but executive management, right? Who are allocating cost centers and budgets specifically for automation. This customer was fully bought in, and they hired people for it, and they trained their existing resources on it. And over a 3.5-year period, completely transformed their operations across all of their their business units. We started in database and then we moved to networking and security and systems. And it was a pretty fun transformation to be a part of and to observe.
And so is this sort of like getting the experience needed to do the moonlighting because it was such a large customer? I'm not sure how interrelated those were.
They were completely separate. The moonlighting was networking specific, right? Or network security specific that would go on outside business hours. So one of the benefits of working in special operations or spec ops, as we called it, and being in that senior level role was the autonomy that we were given. Most days my work day was over by 3:30 or 4, depending on the customer time zone. So I had plenty of time on evenings and weekends to moonlight and to work with customers and make new connections and relationships with customers. So I guess I went back to doing too much. Or maybe I never stopped. I don't know.
You needed to fill up that same Hurt Locker schedule, and moonlighting was the way to do it?
Yeah, I've been clawing my way back ever since, I guess.
I wanted to ask a question about perspective. This is a line that I've been saying, and I wanted to get your take on it. So Nick and I both have backgrounds in virtualization. So I think our bias is to look from the virtual machine or application out. And I've always said that whatever your background is, that is your perspective into an organization. So do you find that your perspective into the organization is from the network perspective as opposed to the application or the database or any of the other aspects, storage, and so on and so forth?
I really like this question, John. I'd say up until I got going with my business and burned the boats to take the island, if you will, and quit my W-2, my perspective was very much a networking viewpoint. But as time has gone on, my approach and viewpoint when I'm working with customers, brand new or existing, is business. What are the business objectives for the organization as it relates to technology? How does technology empower customer X to ship more widgets or whatever it is that is at the core of their business, and really understanding that and digging into the different teams and departments and how they support that, and what their goals and objectives are outside of the fires that they're putting out. And a lot of the value we bring is helping guide them to those realizations with context clues and just better understanding their business and their roadmap.
It's this fascinating thing that I think every single organization that I've been at has pushed us to ask this question of, what is the business problem that we're solving? How do I become so embedded in the organization that I'm thinking about their business the way that they think about their business? But I think it took me a while to realize that question was really, in effect, asking me to abandon my virtualization point of view, database point of view, network point of view, storage point of view. Like every single one of those, business silos is like, well, without the database, there's no business, or without the virtual machines, there's no business. Without the network, there's no business. It's like, and all those things might be true, right? It's like, without the wheels, there's no car. Without the engine, there's no car. But really, how does the organization create value? And that is at the core what's going on. And, it's all the parts and pieces are serving something, that are larger than the parts and pieces. I don't know. Is this something that you're able to teach now to your employees and maintain that perspective as opposed to the parts and pieces perspective?
As you were describing that, I had a lot of stuff come up for me. Without the fill in the blank, there's no business. I've been talking to my team for a really long time, and still do to this day, about how important it is to zoom out from their area of expertise when they're talking to customers. And I credit this to a business coach that I spent some time with last year. She helped me put it into words. And it's just very simple, reminding my team to focus on what's relevant as opposed to what's true, right? It's true that a business can't operate without a network or a database. But turning the question to yourself, is it relevant to this conversation that this business can't function without a database? 9 times out of 10, it's not, unless we're talking about selling an array or a cloud service.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly who said this to me, so I can't credit them. And that's to my regret. But I think it was a person who was talking about having a school system as a customer. And they said, certainly, like the learning management system had a database, and there was an application on top of that to track, all the things that were going on. And there was a transportation system and buses and mechanics and, things to take care of those buses. But, if you said like, well, this school system can't operate without, the wheels on the bus or the engine on the bus, you're kind of missing the point there. Like the point of the school system was to educate students, and certainly having operational buses to pick up students and drop them off at the school and take them back home was really important. And the database for the learning management system was really important. But ultimately, it was, how do we maintain like a terrific learning environment for the students? How do we support the teachers? How does the administration support, that learning environment? And if you didn't understand that, then you were missing the point of everything that you were talking about, right? The people who were making the decisions had the perspective of, how do we improve learning and smooth operations of the organization? And if you were focused on database operations, and you couldn't talk about your database operations and the perspective of smooth, learning, then you were not relevant.
It's a really good illustration, John.
That's the goal, really, is for me to look good in these podcasts, not really anything else.
Well, you're doing a great job.
I think what John is actually saying, if I could put it down, and concentrate it into a single sentence, is we should all think like business owners.
And how do you do that?
Well, I think you have to start with forming the business, right? You did that. I think as a business owner, I'd probably be really careful about who I wanted to be my business partner. You mentioned having a partner. You both put in $50. But when does the business owner decide to start? Like, when you made the LLC, you probably didn't think, I'm going to turn this into a business and run it like you do now. So what's that path?
Yeah, that wasn't the burn the boats point, right? Putting in $50.
Right.
So that was the dipping your toe in, right?
Yeah, we didn't burn the boats till 2019. So over 3 years, August 2019, over 3 years after the company was founded. Honestly, the turning point was when I had to move from being a one-man shop to having to hire a contractor. I hired 2 contractors on the same day, and I didn't know anything about hiring anybody at the time. And they were both referrals from the same trusted individual that suggested I come back to the job where I did automation software development. And one of them didn't work out, but the other one still works for us today. He's been a full-time employee for years. But yeah, just to go back, when it became more than just me is when I started to think about it more like a business than just a solo effort that would fill my weekends or evenings.
More than just me, more than just my viewpoint, like you said, John.
That's an interesting perspective, right at that point where you have to start managing other people and being responsible for them and their lives, or at least one aspect of their lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are you in this position now doing some of the same things that you were doing in enterprise automation, or is it solely focused on the networking that you were doing in your previous life?
Right now, I have a lot of hats that I'm wearing, and from a delivery standpoint, I have my hands in a lot of things. So you name it, from the broad term networking inside and outside of the data center, network security, right? Which I like to starkly contrast with cybersecurity, securing the network with appliances or NVF, network virtualized functions, so VMs of stuff, and enterprise automation, which really is my passion because it allows me to marry my operational and technical experience and my, I wanted to say love for software development, but that's not the right term. I'm enamored by it. This goes back to surrounding yourself with people smarter than you in the proverbial form. I work with and have access to several brilliant lifelong programmers. And it's just like anything else. When you want to learn something or benefit from someone else's experience by virtue of them working with you or being around you, and not working with gatekeepers, of course, is just invaluable.
As we get close to closing, because I know we're at the end of our time slot, so maybe could we just come to a natural conclusion here, Justin, with some advice for people who are thinking about starting their own business, and here's what you're really getting into if you decide to do that?
Yeah, wow. I always lead with don't do it. But not really. No, that's just a joke. After a certain point, being a business owner is being okay with being upset, being embarrassed, being frustrated, failing, and juggling the requirements of a business functioning, right? You live and die by cash flow or working capital management in order to pay yourself and the families that rely on you. So I should have written it down, but the CEO of NVIDIA, who's not on the tip of my tongue, and I'm going to paraphrase, talks about, and maybe this is just my inference, and I'm totally mangling what he said, but being naive is kind of a superpower in the realm of being an entrepreneur, because if I had known what I was up against going into it, I probably would have just ran as fast as I could the other way. It's like standing at the base of a mountain that you have to run up against, 1,000 other people. And, you can just see the whole distance from the base all the way to the summit. And then even when you're up there, you realize that the summit you saw is one of many false summits, and there are many summits to go. It's been a really fun, challenging, difficult journey, and I hope to keep doing it. I didn't answer the question. Don't get discouraged when you fail. Don't get discouraged when your back's up against the wall. Persevere and keep going. And if it doesn't work out, just like if you fail a certification or any other challenge that life throws you, do a brain dump, debrief, reassess, and go back at it. Maybe it's not exactly what you were doing. Maybe you learned some stuff along the way that taught you what you ought not to focus on, which for me is a very important list, what not to do, and take aim at what makes sense now.
It's a great list. We really appreciate you taking the time, Justin, to record this with us and share your wisdom. And we'll certainly be watching the success of Secure Bearing and yourself and your organization from here forward. If people want to follow up with you on this conversation, where can they find you?
You can find us at securebearing.com. Yeah, you can shoot me a message on LinkedIn as well.
Justin, thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
I really enjoyed the conversation. I'm grateful to have been invited on, and I appreciate you guys for your time.
Our pleasure.
We had a good discussion in that episode about how moonlighting can help keep our skills sharp. When we say moonlighting, that means working on something in addition to your day job, perhaps after hours or on the weekends. Now, I want to point out something really important here. Justin did moonlighting when he went back to working for the Hurt Locker because his schedule would allow that. There's no way he would have been able to do that during his first tour of duty inside the Hurt Locker. He talked about working 24-hour shifts. There was no way he would have had time for extra work. So for you, it might make a lot of sense to do some moonlighting in some way, shape, or form, whether it's for pay, independent study, whatever you want to call it. But there might be times in our lives where we just don't have time to add anything extra to our plate because of a work situation, because of a life situation, whether it's you want to do some blogging, you want to speak at an event, you want to do some self-study after hours. It might make sense to capture some data on whether your schedule would actually allow that, and that might set you up better for success as you think through it. But it doesn't make you a bad person if you don't have the room to add that extra stuff. It can certainly be a differentiator for you if you're looking to get that next job or learn something that's perhaps outside your area of focus during the day at work. It might have seemed almost out of place for a second, but I liked the discussion of the technical project related to replacing one VPN technology for another. There were technical reasons for it, yes. It involved learning new technologies, yes. But it was really about improving end user experience and reliability of a service that was provided to the rest of the business. And as a result, that decreased the operating expense by decreasing the bandwidth needed to run the overall business. So this goes in line really well with what we were talking about in reference to perspective. When we look at this from the perspective of what that technology project did for the business and describe those outcomes, I just don't think everybody knows how to do that or thinks about that when they take on a technology project. But I liked the way Justin described how it was very much a learning experience to work with these new technologies. There were definitely mistakes made because that's how we learn. But he was also able to articulate what was the impact to the business that was positive as a result of doing this. And he spoke about the impact, of course, to his own career. Did you notice that increasing the scale of Secure Bearing was actually what prompted Justin to move into it full time? There was more work to do than just one person could handle, and he needed to get extra help, more than just me. So this idea of scale, that could be a decision point for a business unit inside a company even. If you have a product or service that your company is offering and you only have a very small team that's focusing on it, and then all of a sudden the workload picks up, you have a decision to make. Do we invest more in ramping up the people need to do this job or serve this function? Because we might risk not capturing full market potential, for example. Or do we take the learnings and apply that to some other area because we've decided that this just isn't going to be our focus anymore? So for Justin, the scaling event or the need for scale created a decision point. And for him, it was more important to scale the business and keep putting effort there, knowing that he could no longer work a separate full-time job. Secure Bearing became his full-time job. That goes back to some of the really interesting decisions an entrepreneur has to make that Eric Gross talked about in episode 268 that I would definitely go back and listen to complement this episode. I hope you enjoyed Justin's story, and if you did, please rate us 5 stars and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you may be listening. We'll see you next time.
Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White at BJourneyman, for Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_, signing off.
Adios.